of, excuse me, there are a number of folks that have signed up that haven't signed on yet. So forgive me if I get a little distracted putting folks on. So I can just start over. We are recording this. This will be available on our YouTube channel. This is really what we've been calling a fledgling program as we partner with Maine Audubon to think about just starting the conversation of what building bird safe is. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Christine Sheppard from the American Bird Conservancy and Dan Piselli from FXCollaborative, national experts on this topic. But we also have Nick Lund from Maine Audubon, who is our partner in crime on this, if you will. And in 2 weeks, we have a panel of local design practitioners who are just working with clients on addressing this issue. So I really don't want to take up much time. If we go to the next slide, Nick, I want to thank our sponsors. All of our programs in 2021 have been for free and on this digital platform that we've all grown to love. So Zoom has definitely brought us together even as we are apart. But all of our programs for the rest of the year, even in person, will continue to be free, and we are exceptionally grateful. And Nick, the next slide. Also for our sponsors, supporters, friends, and community partners. And our media partner, Maine Home and Design, they really have been instrumental in getting the word out to more readers that are stewards of the built environment to start asking questions. When we were asked what we wanted to feature in our design theory this year, we specifically said we wanted to touch the topic of bird safe. I have clearly said over and over, I am not the expert, but I'm a general expert, and that I love the inquiry and curiosity. And it's the job of PSA to bring the experts together and to have constructive dialogue. So we're exceptionally grateful. And Nick, the last slide here. So on the 30th at noon, the same Zoom link is applicable for their talk as well. We have Danielle Fwasi with Kaplan Thompson, Matt Maiello and Austin Smith with Simons Architects, and Tim Locke from Opal. Really a brilliant local dialogue from some extraordinary designers. So we're looking forward to that. I do want to give Nick a few minutes to talk about Maine Audubon and their initiatives. My favorite project, of course, is retrofitting Gilsland Farm with bird safe interventions, whether it's glass or external additions. And then we will hand it over to Dr. Sheppard, who will kick off the conversation or with a presentation. And then Dan will speak, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So thank you and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Addie. Just very briefly, I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here and hosting this program. This is a great partnership with PSA, and we're excited about the future. This is sort of emerging technology and emerging science, and the more we can learn and know about how birds hit windows, why they hit windows, and what we can do to prevent it, the better we'll all be. I just want to say quickly that, as Addie mentioned, we are working for any designers or builders or architects on the call. We are working on retrofitting our Gilsland Farm headquarters. This is on Route 1 in Falmouth, just over the bridge from Portland, to sort of showcase some different technologies and products that can be used on windows to make them less or more visible to birds and reduce bird strikes. So as we continue with that project, please stop by and ask questions and take a look, and you can see what these things look like in person. I also did want to recognize, I saw Dr. Marr on the call here. She's a professor at USM who is partnering with Maine Audubon and PSA on some monitoring for bird collisions in Portland. We just finished up our spring season a few weeks ago. And so we are working to identify which buildings in Portland are the deadliest to birds and which species and things like that. So thanks, and I'm excited for Dr. Sheppard. She's the leading expert in this this sort of world in the country, so it's great to have her on. And Dan Piselli, I'm excited to hear the presentation. So thanks, Addie, and I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.
And so as Christine puts on her slides for the presentation, the best option for everyone is to actually go into your right-hand corner, click on the speaker view. And then Christine, Dr. Sheppard will take it away. So thank you, everyone.
All right, are you seeing my first slide?
We are.
Excellent. It doesn't always happen like that. So thank you for inviting me. I hope you'll let me come next time because I'd love to know what the projects are that you're working on. I don't think I have to talk about the intrinsic value of birds, but people are often unaware of the economic value of birds to people. When California burns to the ground, birds will bring seeds back in so habitats can be restored. Birds eat insects that might give you West Nile virus or destroy your crops or even destroy your forests. So they're very important, even though we don't tend to be aware of them from day to day. And bird watching has expanded from being a $40 billion industry, especially during COVID, because people have been noticing birds while they've been stuck at home. And they've been noticing that they get collisions on their windows when they didn't really thought that that was happening. The Smithsonian did a meta-analysis a little while ago using data from as many monitoring programs across the country and museums and so forth, all the data they could find to try to get a reasonable estimate of mortality from bird collisions. They came up with a wide range, 300 million to 1 billion. At this point, we think it's probably closer to 1 billion. I won't go into the reasons, but I'm happy to have you ask me later. The only thing that's worse is outdoor cats. So if you have a cat, please keep it inside. It's better for the cat, it's better for wildlife, and it's actually also better for you. There are a lot of things that confuse people about collisions. There's a tendency to think that collisions are associated with high-rise buildings, which is not the case at all. Almost 50% of collisions take place on home windows, and almost all of the rest take place on low-rise buildings. Now, partly this is because there are many fewer skyscrapers than there are other structures, but it's also because the majority of collisions happen in sort of the bird activity zone. So really from the ground up to the top of the tree canopy. And it's a lot like most car accidents happening within 20 miles of home because that's where you do all your driving. This is where birds live. This is where they're looking for food and shelter and mates and so forth. And the reflections of the habitat they're using can be deadly. Most people have heard a collision or seen a collision, but the tendency is for people to think that this is an unusual event. You know, think about how many collisions happen for everyone to have experienced it. It also makes people wonder, you know, why aren't the streets just paved with dead birds if there are so many collisions? Well, birds can bounce off windows into foundation plantings, into drains. They can flutter away even if they're injured and be vulnerable to predation or die later. But primarily it's because scavengers think that dead birds are great, or even not dead birds, because they're full of fat and protein. So especially good windows may actually be staked out by scavengers like crows and raccoons, opossums, your friendly house cat, and so forth, because they learn that birds will show up on a regular basis. There's another source of confusion. The majority of birds that are killed are songbirds, and the most frequent peaks of mortality take place when these birds are flying between their wintering and breeding grounds, so during migration. And most of these birds migrate at night. However, most collisions take place during the day. Just as if you were driving from New York to California, you'd have to pull off the highway periodically for a rest stop. Birds also have to refuel. So they come down still in the very early morning or late at night. When the sun comes up, they need to spend a day or 2 or even 3 days flying around looking for food so that they can rebuild their energy stores. And this is when they collide. They're looking for greenery. That's where food is going to be. They see reflections of greenery. and that's when collisions happen. There's another piece of this I don't really have time to go into, but light, the built environment is lit at night, and this tends to suck birds in so that you find them more frequently in lit areas than you would in the places where you would hope they would be, where there are no lights, where there are no buildings. And this increases the likelihood that birds are going to be flying around where there's glass that they're going to run into. It helps to know just a tiny bit about the differences between human vision and avian vision. We've got eyes in flat faces. They're close together. We don't have anything sticking out between them. So we have very good depth perception. And we tend to see the world as something we're walking into. People are always saying, watch where you're going. It's very different for birds. They don't see the same thing with each eye, almost no overlap. They don't have 3D vision or depth perception and use completely different mechanisms to figure out how fast they're flying or when they're going to get to where they're going. So they presumably see the world as something they're immersed in, especially if they are flying through habitat that they believe is open. They may have most of their attention to the side or behind them to make sure there are no predators sneaking up, to see if there are food sources that they haven't noticed yet. So my model of a bird flying through an open space is really a kid texting on a skateboard, but I haven't been able to video that yet. So the best I've got is this guy texting on a hoverboard. And you can see he's not looking where he's going. His attention is somewhere else. And if by chance there were an obstacle in front of him, he'd run right into it. Another issue is that people believe they can see glass and they wonder why birds can't. The fact is people can't see glass any better than birds do. We learn about glass when we're very young, and we learn the cues that tell us where glass is likely to be. Now, if I take those cues away from you, you can't tell me if this is a picture of a tree, if it's a tree seen through a clear window, or if it's a reflection of a tree. Now, when I give you more information, you know that glass is involved. There's a crack. Right angles are not natural. But only when I show you this do you understand it's a reflection. Birds don't understand any of the cues that you use to know that glass is on that building. So in order to keep birds from flying into reflections or trying to fly through glass that's transparent, we have to create what you might call virtual obstacles. This can take the form of a pattern on glass. So it could be something like a fritted glass. It could also be something like screens or louvers. It could be something outside the surface of the glass. The important thing, excuse me, sorry, too much talking. The important thing is the spaces. It's not even the pattern itself. People care about the pattern. What birds care about is whether or not they can fly through the spaces that the pattern creates. And the spacing that we have to be aware of is based on the size of the bodies of some of the small birds that run into glass. The guidance we've used in the past has been 4-inch vertical spaces and 2-inch horizontal spaces, but we've learned when applying this that it doesn't really work for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds feel perfectly confident that they can fly through a 4-inch gap. So the current recommendation is 2 inches in any direction from one element to another. Sorry about that. We recommend that if you're using lines, which you don't have to, they be at least 1/8 of an inch wide. And if you're using dots, which is what people seem to be most attracted to, those dots actually should be at least 1/4 of an inch in diameter. So here are just a few examples of bird-friendly buildings to show you that you don't have to warp your architecture. If you want to design a box of glass, you can design a box of glass. This happens to have a narrow horizontal stripe. It's extremely bird friendly, and yet you see out very well. And if you look at the building from the parking lot, you'd never know that this was bird friendly glass. When I first started doing this, I was taught to talk about the irony of green design, how sad it was that green design required these gigantic reflective curtain walls. It was only after I'd been working in this field for a year or so that I discovered that that's not true, that above a certain level, you start becoming less sustainable because you require bigger systems for heating and cooling. So this is a really good place to start with bird-friendly design. Start with sustainable design and start with a building that's going to be energy efficient. Although I realize that there are some issues with that too. This is actually the FBI headquarters in Houston, Texas. And it has this odd looking sunshade, which in addition to being a sunshade, also serves as a security device. And as you can see from most angles, most of the glass isn't very visible to birds. So it's also a bird safe device. This is just a building on a campus. This is the S.J. Quinney School of Law in Salt Lake City. There are no bird-friendly design laws in the entire state of Utah. This building opted to go 100% bird-friendly using 3 different strategies. They've got bird-friendly glass, they've got glass that has louvers for sun control, and they also have windows that have external insect screens. So they were going for as sustainable as possible, and bird-friendly is definitely part of that discussion. Oops. This was a building that we looked at because the Metropolitan Museum of Art was at the top of the list of bird-killing buildings based on New York City Audubon's monitoring program. And David Chipperfield was designated to design a new wing on the Met. So we wanted to know what his designs look like. And we discovered this addition to the Anchorage Museum, which is highly reflective, but also at any time between the eye of the bird and that reflective surface is this frit pattern. And when we discussed this with the people at the museum, they said, you're right, you know, we get collisions at home, but we don't get collisions on this building. So it is bird friendly, even though you have reflective glass. I do a lot of work with legislation, partly because I get calls once or twice a week. Somebody has seen something like this in a newspaper and they want me to stop it. Unfortunately, by the time something like this has gotten into the paper, I mean, you're probably very familiar with this. People are in love with the design. They've spent a lot of money on the design, and it's perfectly legal. So they have no reason to make significant changes. It's really important to get the word out, both by educating people so that design will start at the very beginning of the design phase, but also we try to work with people that want to develop bird-friendly legislation and code requirements, which is another thing that will get people to pay attention to this at the beginning of the design phase. And we're seeing more and more jurisdictions add some kind of bird-friendly requirement to their building codes. There are a lot of them in California, which I think is interesting because San Francisco was the very first in 2011. And the most recent ones happened in 2021. So obviously people are looking at San Francisco and saying, hey, this works. This is not a big deal. We could do it too. Dan and I have both been involved with one of the most recent pieces of legislation, New York City's Local Law 15. And that he's going to talk a little bit more about that and show you some buildings that were built that would meet the requirements even though they were built before the law existed. ABC has a glass rating program. And I can't talk about it much because we're going to run out of time, but we have this contraption, which is about an hour east of Pittsburgh at the Powder Mill Avian Research Center. And it allows us to basically ask birds, can you see this? Will you avoid it? So this is what it looks like when we put a bird inside a tunnel, which is what we call the thing. On the inside, birds see two possible ways to leave. And on one side usually is whatever we're testing, the other side is plain glass. You can see here there's a net stretched across the end of the tunnel so birds are not injured. And as soon as birds have made one flight through the tunnel, we open this door and let them out. So we're not testing the same birds over and over again. This is the basis of what we call threat factors. And threat factor is fundamental to New York City's legislation. It was a little bit of a surprise when they decided to do it that way. But we have been trying to expand our ability to rate glass so that this rating program doesn't become a bottleneck. And in fact, we're starting to construct a second tunnel. I, again, will not talk about this in too much detail, but this is one of the first things that we looked at. It's why I say I hate dots. We looked at 1/8 of an inch dots with 20% coverage. We looked at 40% coverage, and then we looked at 1/8 of an inch wide lines, which were 1/2 an inch apart, so back to 20% coverage. And what we found was 20% coverage didn't work very well at all. 40% coverage worked a little bit better, but when we went to these lines, 90 to 95% of the birds avoided the frit pattern. So the lines are a much better signal to a bird. I think that these dots look to them a bit like a fog bank. It's hard for them to process it, and the dots are too small for them to resolve individually. So if you're interested in more resources, if you go to birdsmartglass.org, we've recently put a lot more information up on our website. Unfortunately, our website can be confusing, so if you do go to birdsmartglass.org, scroll down to find the menu. You can download bird-friendly building design, which is now actually available in English, Korean, and Portuguese. And we have these home solution flyers, which are available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, which can also be downloaded. We've got a gallery of designs, and we have a searchable database of bird-friendly materials. And that is the end of my piece.
Thank you, Christine. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to that direct link so everyone could have that as well. And in my follow-up email, I'll also send out some info and links as well.
All right. So hi, I'm Dan Piselli. I'm the Director of Sustainability at FXCollaborative Architects in New York. And I've been working with Chris Sheppard since about 2005. And I'll show you the building that spurred our meeting and work together. And I'm going to show you a bunch of more architectural things. First thing is, as the, I'm the Director of Sustainability. So I'm concerned with many more, environmental issues than just bird collisions, but it definitely fits into the bigger picture. This is a great graphic. Here's, this COVID-19 wave, people were concerned about a recession, but there's this bigger problem of climate change, obviously, that most of us are believe in and want to take care of. And, climate change also, leads to this even bigger problem of just, ecological systems collapsing. And, this issue of bird collisions with buildings is like, just like one of the most visual and manifestations of that's kind of already happening. So I definitely see this as part of the bigger picture. So I'm going to show you a bunch of examples here. The Center for Global Conservation at the Bronx Zoo, which is a building that Chris worked in. We designed it, she worked in it, and we tried some strategies there. The Javits Center in New York, which has gotten a lot of press. The New York Times building, which we did with Frenzo Piano Building Workshop. Columbia University School of Nursing, the Columbia University Business School, which we're doing with Taylor, Scofidio, and Renfro, and the Statue of Liberty Museum. So to a certain extent, we put bird safe strategies in all these buildings. Just briefly on glass, this is a diagram of what insulating glass is. Typically 2 panes of glass. There are surfaces. The outmost surface, like plane of glass, is the number 1 surface. The backside of that outside piece of glass is the number 2 surface. It's usually where we put a low E coating for solar control. And then on the inboard piece of glass has surface 3, and then 4 is faces the inside. And the most effective place to put some kind of visual cue that is going to deter birds from hitting the glass is on the number 1 surface, because it's just there, it's most visible, it's in front of all the things that are doing reflecting. And then as we put it farther back, certain manufacturers can put that pattern, like a frit pattern, outside of this low E coating. That's a good position as well. Some manufacturers have to put the frit inside of the low E coating, so a little bit less effective, and less effective inboard from there. And then here's another diagram of so there's newer technology, UV patterning. UV patterning works a little bit different. There's your kind of basic assembly with a low E coating there in blue. But outside of that, you have this UV patterning, which it's similar to a low E coating. It's metals that are sputter coated onto the glass, but it reflects UV light in the UV spectrum, which birds can see deeper into the UV spectrum, so they can see these things. But then in yellow here, typically what a laminated light of glass is needed in the lamination is a UV absorptive layer. So that allows the relatively relatively weak reflection of the UV to actually show up against this UV absorptive background. So just some basics there. Okay, here's the Center for Global Conservation. We designed it in about 2004 or 2005. And at the time, Chris and other experts, had some ideas about what would work in terms of bird collisions. And we tried some of them. Some of them worked and some of them didn't. So it was a great lab, which sounds like Maine Audubon is going to do something similar and test a bunch of strategies. And that's great. So it was pretty important at this building. I mean, not only is it at the zoo, but it also is in a kind of a heavily wooded kind of corner outside of where people usually visit. And here's some of the strategies that did not work. So it was thought that overhangs were kind of enough to deter collisions at one point. And definitively, we found, there are various overhangs in the building. They did not deter any collisions, much of any collisions at all. We tried solar shading devices that are outside of the glass. These are wood slats. Unfortunately, these were supposed to be, there were supposed to be twice as many of these, so the spacing would have been, twice as close. It might have worked if it was twice as close, but these ended up being about 15 inches apart from each other. And it turned out that, birds in flight just saw through them and saw collisions, and there were a number of collisions there. I should just note that on the top of these images, there's this diagram with these, black dots and circles, and that's all. This is like one season of monitoring that Chris and her team performed. So it's really, super valuable to have that monitoring data so that we kind of could tell what worked and what didn't work. Something that did work was this UV reflective material, which this is the version of the material that was available at the time. I think this was maybe the second building in the United States that used this stuff. And we could only afford it in one room, the main conference room here. You can kind of see the vertical lines of it in the image here, but being in the room, it's very unobtrusive and doesn't call attention to itself whatsoever. And in this particular migration season, they had no collisions on that glass, and I believe they haven't had any collisions at all. So it actually worked very well. And then since then, as Chris and her team were working there, they ended up retrofitting some areas where there was no mitigation on the glass. And so here's an example of some lines that were applied. So it's just vinyl material that's kind of like, applying a logo on a storefront, So she had that stuff applied for various places around the building. So really great test case building. So from that building, we worked on this major renovation of the Javits Center in New York City. Super really, really glassy building. It was really dark glass that was very reflective. And it was one of the bigger bird killing buildings. Well, it was the worst building in the city in terms of how many birds it was killing. So we knew we had to do something about it. And here's the building. You can kind of see how much glass there is. So there were a couple of issues here. One issue was we wanted to put a green roof on this building, and when we did. And this, I forget exactly how many acres, it was like 7 acres or something like that of green roof. So not only were we had this problem of glass, we were also adding habitat and actively trying to, attract birds and other kind of urban fauna to the site. So we were kind of exacerbating the problem. And our solution was twofold. One was that we actually replaced some of the glass with just kind of opaque materials, which we did for, it was just, it wasn't vision glass anyway. So we were able to kind of rationalize doing that. And then for the actual glass, we used a newer glass that was low reflectance and had a frit. So here's the green roof, and there's the finished condition, and there's actually birds nesting on the roof, so it's actually attracting. So here's the glass. There's a frit pattern. It's a relatively dense frit pattern. I don't know where it lands on that scale Chris was talking about in terms of the density of patterns, but it works on the building that don't have many collisions with the glass. And here's what it looks like. So this is a big building and you're very far away from the glass. So, these small dots don't really show up at that scale. Here's a close-up from the inside. You can kind of see slightly gauzy effect of the skyline, but nobody complains or anything. It's we kind of the way that we rationalized having this frit to kind of pay for it and have it last through value engineering processes. We're always trying to cut money from buildings. Was that it reduced the solar heat gain coefficient of the glass, which was all about reducing energy loads and making the HVAC, the cooling equipment, smaller. So we were really trying to save money, save energy, reduce the energy use of the building, and using this frit was a great way to do it. So, and so simultaneously doing that, but also kind of opening up the view in and out from what used to be this really dark, like sunshades kind of building. You know, we were able to do that with this frit pattern. Here's a view from the outside. And good results. This particular migration season, there was a 90% reduction. I think some years it was more like 95% reduction in collisions. Next building is the New York Times building. This one had no pretense of trying to address the bird safe issue. But, you know, just over time, we've been collecting these examples and we now like refer to it as, you know, something that we can use. This has a kind of a different solar shading device strategy. It has these terracotta kind of tubes that form this pattern. The building is it's supposed to kind of resemble a newsprint page, like a piece of paper, you know, newspaper aesthetic. And you know, these tubes are more tightly spaced than the wood shading devices at the Center for Global Conservation, and they seem to be very effective. You know, there are no reported collisions through those areas. Here's a view from inside out. Actually, I met somebody who worked at the New York Times, and I asked them, you know, about it, and like they literally didn't even know what I was talking about. Like these tubes did not register to this person as a thing or a problem in their workspace. So views, you know, light coming into the building, all worked out very well. So there's another building, the Columbia University School of Nursing. This one's very interesting because we use this ceramic frit technology on the #1 surface of the glass, which is apparently they used to do it in the 1970s. It failed, so it wasn't possible. It wasn't even available for many, many years. But now it's available again. I think this is maybe the second building in New York City that has used this frit on the #1 surface. And there you can see it's the lines that are in the upper part of the building. Again, this building did not have a pretense of trying to address bird safety. There was a different benefit. The two benefits I would call out are that the neighborhood is predominantly residential. So there's all these residential buildings across the street. And Columbia University was very conscious of wanting to avoid this kind of like slickness that a glassy building kind of brings with it. So they were trying to, specifically having to do with reflections, you know, harsh reflections into, you know, neighboring apartments and just the street life. So this #1 surface frit was very effective at kind of like subduing the effect, the negative effects of perceived effects and also glare from the building. And then also, you know, there's a certain level of privacy that is created with this frit pattern. You're looking here at a study area that's in the corner of the building, so students can come there and study and be, you know, not spied on by the neighbors, or the neighbors don't have to feel like the students are looking at them either. So privacy and being a good neighbor. This building's under construction in the Columbia University Business School. This one, again, no pretense of trying to be a bird safe building. We're actually the architect of record. Diller's Video Renfro designed this one. But and it's got this very binary glass design situation where there's this like super clear glass, it's half of the building, and then this again #1 surface white frit on the other half of the building. And I'm really anxious to see what happens when this building is finished. There's going to be a park in front where you see this construction equipment, and I'm nervous, I have to say, for the super clear parts, but at least we can point to the #1 surface frit in this kind of field instead of the lines, as something we can keep in our quiver and I've seen photos from here's some photos from the inside Again, it's kind of not obtrusive to the feeling of being inside. You can see in, light comes, you can see out, light comes in, and it's going to be a nice interior space. Last one, the Statue of Liberty Museum. It's a very different approach to the glass in this building. This building's trying to merge with the landscape. It's kind of bermed into the hill. This green roof comes down. And with this one was very interesting because I was the project manager on this project, and I was looking for some rationale for how to argue for bird safe glass here. And I found like deep in the National Park Service design guidelines, there was some line that said, consider bird safe buildings. And I took that and ran with it and just made it inevitable on the project, which was great because, bringing in all this landscape again was going to exacerbate potential problems for bird collisions. In this case, different approach to pattern making on the glass. Again, it's a ceramic frit. It ended up being on the number 3 surface actually, but it has been working. And again, very unobtrusive from the outside. Like nobody complains about it. And from the inside, it's, you can kind of see here the lines. You kind of have to get up close to the glass to see it. But it's a vertical pattern specifically because there's a lot of vertical stuff on the site. There's the statue, there's this flagpole here, there's the skyline of the city, there's a lot of trees around. So when we were comparing patterns, this vertical dot pattern worked for us. And we actually got it's a LEED gold building, and we got the LEED bird collision mitigation point for that. That was the first time we achieved that. So over time, we've been, developing all these different solutions, kind of customized to these unique situations. But it's a really interesting history of having dealt with this issue for almost 15 or so years now, and it's really great. So just briefly on the current situation in New York City, there's this law, local law 15 of 2020, and it's pretty strict, and we're having to deal with it now. So essentially, all glass under not all glass, 90% of all glass under 75 feet is subject to this law and must be bird friendly. And more than 90%, it's broken down into every 100 square feet, 90% of that glass has to be bird safe. So you can't really take all the, some corner of the building, make the whole corner, just regular glass and just do bird safe glass somewhere else. It's got to be distributed so it actually works. I'll skip that one. So around green roofs, anywhere up the building. This is about glass guardrails. So glass guardrails at any height of the building, even if they're above 75 feet, must be bird safe. Corners would, fly through conditions where a bird might see through one corner of the glass, out the other side of the glass. That's called a fly-through condition. Those must be 100% bird safe. So you don't get that 10 square feet of leniency at the corners. And then at green roofs, again, at any height of the building, if you have a green roof 100 feet up and there's glass adjacent to it, up to 12 feet, so essentially one floor of glass adjacent to green roofs must be bird safe. And bird safe in this context means a threat factor of 25. A threat factor of 25 essentially means it's very bird safe. New York City got really activist. Chris's group, the American Bird Conservancy, says a threat factor of 30 is bird safe. New York City decided to be even more strict than that and tuned it down to 25. So according to those rules, 2 of those buildings that I showed you would actually comply and the other ones wouldn't because of this coverage issue. So the Statue of Liberty Museum, the Javits Center. So there's that. Here's my slide of other examples. There's, I just wanted to say that, our architecture is not all glass. People do form making with all kinds of materials. Personally, I'm a passive house designer. I like to design with opacity and solid materials. So that there's all, there's a synergy between energy efficient design, which has less windows, and bird collision mitigation. So it's just not the kind of work we do in the city. And wanted to raise this very recent phenomenon. So this is the World Trade Center site, and there's this glass guardrail that's part of a new park, and they were getting a lot of collisions. And just this month, the Port Authority, the owner of the site, retrofit all that glass and put these little white dots on all of it. So that's pretty amazing that, and I think Chris had something to do with helping them. And now that this law is in effect, it's in effect for all building types. You'll notice conspicuously there were no residential buildings in my examples. And that's because we haven't been able to convince any residential building owners to do this. But now they have to by law. So, so this photo is from just the other day where we had a project meeting looking at all the options, and we're trying to decide what to do between dots and dot colors and what happens at spandrels and are the UV things that are more clear too expensive? So pretty much all architects in New York City are dealing with those questions right now. So that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dan. That was awesome. I am very curious to see how residential does come into this. So I can't wait to have you back to see. Terry, who I just also have to give a shout out to, is my husband's aunt, who is in Bainbridge Island. She's a landscape architect. Her husband is an architect, and I'm really thrilled to have her on the call. I think this is great. The ask here is the height of 75 feet. And where did that policy come from?
Yeah, 75 feet came from a, so there was a group of us that was kind of helping the city, and we looked at tree heights. So, per Chris's expertise, birds are mostly hanging around where there's vegetation, and there's many street trees in New York City. And we looked at some parks. It's common for there to be tall buildings around parks, and we found that street trees, some street trees can grow to 100 feet. But 75 was arrived at because there's a definition in New York City building code that a high-rise building is 75 feet, or taller than 75 feet. So it was a little bit arbitrary. Like there was really no way to scientifically say, okay, the trees are only so high, birds fly this high over trees. So it had something to do with picking a relatively high number that had something to do with New York City building code. But that said, the lead credit only deals with glass, I think around 30 feet. So this more than doubled what LEED calls for.
Dan, I have a question, if I may.
Please.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that sort of evolution of products to resolve this, and whether maybe the New York law or other laws have spurred additional investment or options? Yeah,
I think Chris will have answers to this too, because she gets bombarded on a daily basis by manufacturers who are trying to offer products in the city. But I think she and I and others, have been, lobbying these manufacturers to make solutions for a long, long time, but they really have kicked it into gear, specifically since New York City passed its law, because it's just such a huge market. They have to deal with it. Yeah.
Great,
Kind
thanks.
of following up on Nick's question, how has the cost changed? Are we seeing, prices coming down for some of these products, or yeah, I guess how expensive are some of these things?
Yeah, well, frit it's like a couple dollars a square foot depends on the complexity of everything, but it could be like between $2 and $5 a square foot for frit. The UV solutions they are more expensive. Coming from Germany, there's special materials, so that they can be double or more than that for the cost of the glass itself. But it is hoped, and so this New York City law really just came into effect. It was passed last year, but it came into effect January 1 of this year. So, and of course, we've had this COVID problem with supply chains. So it might take a couple of years, but the thought is once these manufacturers get kind of ramp up production for, we expect it to come down. We've also heard about some competitiveness, specifically among the UV manufacturers. One of them promised that they would.
Yeah, Guardian Glass told me that they'd actually been caught by surprise. Right now, they've introduced a UV solution which is made in the U.S. but actually pricier than importing it from Germany. But they're anticipating that as demand ramps up, they'll be able to produce it in larger quantities, and the cost will really drop. And they've got a UV pattern that's on surface 1. So this is, we are seeing a number of these products now manufactured in the U.S. And as demand grows, we just haven't quite reached that point yet. The cost is going to really drop because it'll be more efficient to produce this stuff.
And it's interesting too, the way windows are actually made. There are the glass suppliers, and then there are actually the casement suppliers, and the relationship there. I know that some of our suppliers in Maine who we work with are nervous just how the glass will arrive on time to get made into the casement. And
we've been working with Cardinal, and Cardinal is very interested in manufacturing bird-friendly windows for homes. I believe that they have an agreement now with Ornolux to do UV materials, but they're also trying to develop their own glass. And so they have invested quite a lot of energy over the last 3-4 years, into making themselves a company that's going to be able to provide for this market.
That's a company that provides to the Andersons and Marvins and
right. Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay. And then also, Dan, you and I spoke too about being maybe delayed or skeptical of putting in bird safe glass and then having to retrofit after, and the expense of that. Can you speak a little more to that? Have you actually worked on a project where they did the retrofit after, and it was sort of an oh no moment?
I've been working for a couple of years now with a building that we designed that's having a number of collisions, and it's a condo, and there's a condo board, and the developer is still part of the condo board. So we're working on at least getting a mock-up done to try to get kind of buy-in from the all these people and getting estimating. I mean, it's difficult. It's taken a couple of years to just get to the point of a mock-up probably happening. So it's very difficult. But that said, there's another project I'm working on, which is another kind of residential building, and we're going to replace all the glass in this building. It's a big New York City residential building, and we're probably going to put in insect screens. You know,
Oh,
there was a time when insect screens were just normal,
Mhm.
and then you know, it kind of fell out of fashion at some point. So we're going to use them in this retrofit.
I love insect screens.
Yeah.
Dan knows that.
Well, this is great. We're coming on the 1 o'clock hour, so I do want to encourage anyone that hasn't spoken or has questions. It's funny, I know that a number of folks will be watching this after they signed up, but they will watch the recording. So I might be getting a lot of email questions. But we do want to welcome you both to Maine as well. Maybe Dan, sooner than later, as you travel to Acadia, if you already booked your hotel. Otherwise, you're probably not coming, but that's that's another story. And then again with Nick, you know, hosting this demo site, you know, is really extraordinary. Again, for residential and commercial, to come out and see products in situ is going to be key. And you know, to also admit the pros and cons. You know, as technologies do change, as costs come down or fluctuate, and also supply chains as well. So any further questions? I don't want to take away anyone's time today.
I want to say thank you. This was really great and informational. I feel like every time I hear about this subject, I learn another new thing that scientists just learned or manufacturers just learned. So this was great.
Yeah, I'm grateful. And like I said in the beginning, this is fledgling. So we are, you know, we will literally build in flight. And reflect, pun intended. It's too hard. It's too easy not to do this. I know. But I am really, really grateful and excited just to open this conversation and to keep it going. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And anyone else? Great. Good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.